Every strand fragment is finally unlocked, and in this one I want to go over the Hunter. So this build's all about crowd control and having your enemies be able to do literally nothing to you. We're going to take advantage of that heavily with the suspend element on strand, but we can also take advantage of things like stasis, so we can also freeze and slow a bunch of targets. And on top of all that, with this season we will also be taking advantage of volatile rounds, and we have a whole bunch of different verbs on different subclasses playing heavily into the build, and it honestly is just crazy. All right, so jump right into it. Let's talk about our subclass, and let's first go over our aspects: Widow Silk and Ensnaring Slam. So Widow Silk says you have an additional grenade charge. Your grapple creates a grapple tingle at the grapple point. So this aspect is clearly trying to cater you towards using the grappling hook, since you can make those grapple points. But the other benefit is gaining an additional grenade, which is very strong on its own, and that is what we're going to be taking advantage of the most with this build, because we're going to be running things like Shackle Grenade. This grenade is the suspend grenade. You can throw this at enemies and it will lock everything up in the air, and since you are on the Hunter with Widow Silk, you do have 2 of those charges. But now, speaking of suspend, we need to talk about Ensnaring Slam. This says activate your air move to consume your class ability energy and dive to the ground, suspending all nearby targets on impact. Using this ability extends class ability cooldown time. So essentially you can now use your dodge to do this really cool animation and suspend everything around you. So now between your class ability and your grenade, you have 2 different ways of suspending enemies, which again is very strong and is pretty much the main thing of Strand. Now what's really cool with this setup, we can actually take advantage of an exotic that doesn't really get used that often, and that is the 6th Coyote. So since Widow Silk is giving you additional grenade charge, which means you have 2 shackle grenades or 2 suspending grenades, you can now use 6th Coyote, which has the exotic perk Double Dodge, which just says gain a 2nd dodge charge. So since you have an additional dodge charge, that means you have an additional Ensnaring Slam, and you have 4 abilities up at all times pretty much, where you can always suspend enemies and nothing will be able to shoot you. Suspending enemies also works on champions. They stun unstoppable champions, and they make it where it's really easy to take down barriers. It's difficult to explain just how good suspend is until you use it yourself, and I promise you, once you use this setup, you're going to see the true potential. Now some other things to make this build work, I would highly recommend running Marksman Dodge, since it does have a lower cooldown than Gambler's Dodge. Ensnaring Slam will actually extend the class ability cooldown. If this is a base cooldown, it doesn't matter which one you run, but if it does play off what your actual dodge is, 100% go with Marksman Dodge. Also, a really cool thing to note about the melee, other than the fact that you can retrieve it, which is just really cool on its own, is the fact that this will sever enemies. Severing enemies will actually make whatever targets that are hit by it do reduce damage, so this is really good if you go into a boss scenario or just any tank your target. Throw this on them and they can do reduced damage. Obviously, if you're in any scenario that where you're not fighting a boss, you also have your 4 different ways to suspend enemies, but this gives us further see how you're supposed to crowd control the build and let all the enemies basically do nothing to you. Now the Super Silk Strike is also really good. It's really good for act clear. It's also really good for doing a lot of damage right now in the current game, so this is definitely something you should not sleep on, because it is honestly really good. Now for fragments, I'm running Threat of Mind, so defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. This one is obviously a no-brainer, since you have so many different ways to suspend enemies, and one of your main ways is with your class ability. That just means now defeating the suspended targets will give you all your class ability energy back. This fragment right here alone pretty much lets you have infinite uptime on your class ability, no matter what your mobility actually is, and it's going to play heavily into this setup. Now I'm also going to run Threat of Warding, so this is picking up an overpower grants Woven Melt. So we're going to have some different ways to make orbs with this build. So now essentially this is just going to give us a 60% damage reduction once we pick up an orb for 10 seconds, and you can proc this over and over again. Now we're also going to be running Threat of Generation, so dealing damage grants grenade energy. So this is going to give you some passive grenade energy over time. Obviously with Threat of Mind you have your class ability cooldown, but now Threat of Generation, you're going to be getting your grenade cooldown back, so you can have all of the suspend you need. Then finally Threat of Continuity, so suspend, unravel, and sever effects applied to targets have increased duration. The main thing with this is suspend, and you do again also have access to sever, but now your suspend will just last longer and nothing will just be able to shoot you for even longer. Now weapons to pair with this build, I honestly really like running Ager's Scepter. Like I said in the beginning, this is going to be the stasis aspect of the build. When you get a kill with this, it will slow enemies around and you will also freeze enemies eventually. This is going to be also very good for crowd control. Between this and suspend, you just cannot let anything ever shoot you at all. It is ridiculously strong, and this could even be powerful in something like the day 1 raid, because if nothing can shoot you, well, you're not going to die. Now you don't really need to run this, but if you do want to run it for fun, you can. I would honestly recommend taking something like Arbalist, so you can just have some really reliable anti-barrier stuns. But on top of that, obviously Arbalist is also just pretty good for taking out major targets Even with a horde is also really good because you can pair this with things like Threat of Generation to get a bunch of grenade energy. Now, for my other weapons, I'm primarily going to be running Void. I did make a video yesterday talking about why Void is so good this season if you all like to check it out, but I do love to pair the Unforgiven with this build. One, because it's Void, and then two, because it has Demolitionist. So Demolitionist is going to give you a bunch of grenade energy when you get a kill, and when you throw your grenade, you'll reload your gun. Now, Unforgiven can also roll with Repulsor Race, which is what I would highly recommend going for this with this specific build, because with a Repulsor Race, when you get a kill with the gun, if they have a Void debuff on them, you'll get an Overshield. So having the Overshield pair with things like Woven Mail, you're pretty much going to be unkillable. And then also just have a Red Herring on here because it's just a Void rocket, but any Void power weapon will work. Now, the reason Void is going to be so good is because we do have access to things like Volatile Flow. So when you pick up an Orb of Power, it will grant yourself Volatile Rounds. Volatile Rounds are extremely strong for ad clear. It makes this build even better because now not only can nothing shoot you, but now when you have everything suspended up, you can also just blow everything up with your Void weapon. Volatile Rounds is also really good for adding some additional damage for Balls DPS. It's extremely easy to practice. All you have to do is pick an orb up. It's really easy to do from just playing the game normally, and in any Balls scenario, when you pop a Well of Radiance, it makes orbs and you can just pick them up and go on and proc things like this. Now, Bricks from Beyond is also really good because when you kill a powerful combatant, you have a chance to generate heavy ammo for you and your allies. Since you're mainly running Void with this to take advantage of volatile rounds, you're now just going to have more heavy spawn, which is really, really good. Then also things like authorized mods, Void, Strand, and Grenades also really good, so you can reduce the energy cost of all your other mods. I get questions all the time asking how I do have lesser cost mods. This is the reason. And then even things like Counterweave is also good. When you or a teammate suns a champion, you will get some Strain cooldown for your least ability. Since Strain is the main thing you're running, obviously this is a no-brainer to slot on. Now, speaking of champions, I am running an SMG, so I'm obviously going to be taking Overload Auto SMG. The main reason Overload is the most important part of this is because, again, your Suspend will be able to stun unstoppable champions, and then Volatile Rounds also does have the ability to stun anti-barrier, so the only real thing you have to worry about is Overload. And then obviously, again, you have things like Overload Auto SMG and then Overload Bow, which are very, very good. Volatile Rounds can be a little finicky on doing anti-barrier, so that's why I did recommend run something like Arbalest, so you can just have the trifecta of champion mods and you really never have to swap this loadout at all. Now, stats for this build, you definitely want to go 100 discipline and 100 resilience. Right now, my armor for my 100 is not the greatest for this build, mainly my 6 Coyote kind of lacking a little bit, but if you can get to 100 resilience, that is exactly what you want to go for. And if you have any more points, honestly, just dumping them in mobility is probably your best option, but again, you don't really need mobility because you do have Threat of Mind. But getting into our mods, if you want to just copy down what I have really quick before I go super in depth on what I'm going to be running, these are the mods I will be taking for this build. But all right, let's start talking about everything. Mainly, we're going to be running a Void Siphon, so you get rapid Void weapon final blows, you're creating Orb of Power. Since we're obviously running Void with this build, you're going to be creating orbs, which gives you Woven Mail and Armor Charge. Now, I'm also going to be running Heavy Ammo Finder, so increases the drop chance of heavy ammo on kills. This is obviously just very good for getting heavy ammo back, but you can also pair that with things like a Heavy Ammo Scout, so when you find a Heavy Ammo Finder brick, this will also create that Ammo Finder brick for your teammate. So you're basically making ammo for your team. And then obviously, if we go back really quick, Bricks from Beyond also gives you the chance of making heavy ammo for your team when you have a Void weapon kill on powerful combatants. So they will stack together and you can have a bunch of heavy ammo for your team alongside also generating orbs for yourself to give yourself Woven Mail, Volatile Rounds, and Armor Charge. Now, I do also have a Void Loader on here, just to increase your load so you don't have Void weapons, since that's the main thing I'm running. But I also have double bolstering detonations. So this is going to grant class ability energy when you cause damage with a grenade. Since you have double grenades, this means you're just going to get a bunch of class ability energy back. Comparing this with your fragments, again, you're going to have pretty much infinite uptime on your Ensnaring Slam. Now, always be sure to swap out whatever resistant mods you need for whatever content you're going into, but I would highly recommend running something like a Charged Up. So this will increase the maximum of stacks of armor charge you can have by 1. So now you can have 4 armor charge stacks instead of 3, which is going to be really good playing some of our other mods. Now, we're also going to be running 3 Void Weapon Surges. So this just means when you have an armor charge, you're going to be doing more damage. If you run 3 of these, your Void weapons will be doing 22% more damage. And to help combo with that, we're also going to be running a time dilation. So every single armor charge that has a timer will have a longer duration. So normally these will only last 10 seconds. And since you can hold 4 armor charges, that would be 40 seconds of 22% increased Void damage. But now, since this will make it last 15 seconds, you have a full minute of increased Void weapon damage, alongside being able to give heavy ammo for your team, alongside being able to do volatile rounds, and obviously alongside being able to suspend everything with the entire build. Now, the reason I have extra energy left over is because I'm going to be running Reaper with this build, but unfortunately it is not available to slot in right now. So this just makes it so after you use your class ability, when you get a weapon final blow, you're creating an Orb of Power. Now, I do want to note really quick, since I haven't had the time to test it because the mod just has not worked since I played on my Hunter, But things like Ensnaring Slam will not proc Bomber, Outreach, and Distribution. But I think Reaper is its own special case because these basically are when you're using your class ability, whereas Reaper says after using your class ability. So it will proc after the Ensnaring Slam is done. But if it doesn't work, don't worry, it's not the end of the world, because obviously you also have things like Void Siphon that will also give you orbs of power. But I would highly recommend slotting this on to make it a whole lot easier once it does come back online. But that's pretty much the build. Again, as a roundup, you're going to have double Suspending Grenades alongside having double Ensnaring Slams, which again is another way to suspend with 6 Coyote. You have access to every single champion mod. You have access to make a bunch of heavy ammo for your teammates alongside having volatile rounds up pretty much 24/7. You have a crazy amount of Void Weapon damage boost for a very, very long duration. And you also have the ability to get even more class ability energy back with things like Bolstering Detonation. Pairing that with all the new Strand fragments, you have a bunch of grenade energy, you have Suspend and Sever to last a lot longer, you have 60% damage reduction with Woven Mail, and obviously that class ability will come back even faster because of Threat of Mind. Now, like I always do at the end of these videos, this is the armor set I am running. I know a lot of you all like to copy the armor sets I have down since I make a new one for every single build I put out, but this is what I was going for, and honestly I didn't have any really thought in mind while making this one. I just kind of put stuff together and I thought it looked cool, so yeah, that's it. There's nothing really super special about it. But anyways, that's gonna do it all for me. I will have a dim link to this build in the description if you all would like to check it out. And as always, if you all enjoy it and learn anything new, consider subscribing, dropping a like, and turn those notifications on. Also, if you'd like to join my Discord or follow me on any of my socials, all that will be linked in the description as well. But just know watching this video is way more than enough, and that every single bit of support from you all is truly appreciated. Thank you all so much for watching this one, and have a great day.